Hi friends, it's Laurie. Thanks for stopping by. Today I'm participating in a Thrift Makeover collab with Liana from Liana DIY and Linda from Faith Chick 777's DIY by Design, along with some of my other crafty friends, and I'll be linking our amazing playlist below in my description, so make sure you check it out. I'm starting my first makeover DIY by using this little wooden crate that I found at Goodwill for $1.99. The wood isn't perfect and it has some imperfections, so I'm going to take a piece of sandpaper and just kind of sand it down randomly here and there and give it more of a vintage look. I'm placing the crate on its side and I don't want my greenery to fall out, so I'm using a craft stick and I'm cutting off both of the round ends, and then I'm cutting it in half. With my two pieces cut, and I could honestly just leave them this color, but I want them to match the crate, so I'm going to be rubbing some old coffee grounds on them to give them that hint of brown. Once my two pieces had dried, I turned my crate on its side, and using my hot glue gun, I attached my two pieces of wood, making sure I covered the two openings on the crate. To attach my greenery inside of the crate, I'm using a piece of Sahara block, or you can use floral foam. They sell this at the Dollar Tree. I placed it inside to get my measurements, and then I cut off a piece. I'm using some Spanish moss that I had on hand, but you can always use the reindeer moss that they sell at the Dollar Tree. I want to hide the foam block, so I place some hot glue on the top and the sides, and then I just attach the Spanish moss to it. Once my top and sides were covered, I then used my hot glue gun and I attached it onto the pieces of wood inside the center of my crate. To add my greenery, I'm using 3 Dollar Tree succulents, and I have been obsessed with these lately. I'm using the blue one as my focal point, so I'm just adding some hot glue to the base and I'm placing it inside the floral foam. I'm then adding my green and my smaller one to each side. As my filler, I'm using some of the foxtails from the Dollar Tree, and I'm not only using the flowers, but I'm adding in some of the leaves as well. This is the fun part of making this project. You can add in as many flowers or as much greenery as you'd like. I added some pieces of greenery to the front and I let them cascade down. And then I used the two different types of leaves that came with the foxtails and I added those in as well. My inspiration for this makeover piece is a $229 Succulents in a wooden crate by Frontgate, and it is beautiful, but I really like the pop of blue color that I added to mine. If you didn't want to use this piece as a wall hanging, you could always add some legs to the bottom or just set it as is. When I finished adding in all my greenery, my inspiration makeover was complete. For my second makeover, I'm using a wooden tray that I found at the Goodwill for $1.99. There's a small imperfection on the corner, so I'm using my sandpaper to sand that down, and then I'm also going to be removing the shiny finish. Now that my tray's all sanded down and I wiped away the residue, I'm going to use this pretty Calypso blue and some baking soda to make my own chalk paint. I don't formally measure them, but I'm using about 2 tablespoons of my paint and a heaping teaspoon of my baking soda. And then I just mix them both together. With everything mixed together, I'm now painting my entire tray with this pretty blue paint, with the exception of the flat center. With my tray all painted and dry, I'm going to try this Dollar Tree chalkboard paint. I've never tried it before and I wasn't sure how much I was going to need, so I bought 2 bottles. I used my paintbrush and the chalkboard paint, and then I edged my way around the inside of the tray. I found this paint to be super thick, so as I was working my way around, I made sure not to leave any high spots in the paint. When I was done, I added some of the chalk paint to the surface, and using a foam brush, I slowly spread it on, making sure not to create any air bubbles. When I was done, I then let it set overnight. The next morning, using a larger foam brush, I added another coat of the chalkboard paint, but this time I applied it in the opposite direction. The label didn't say how long to let it set up, but I let it set for 2 days to make sure it was fully dry. To condition the board, I used the side of a piece of white chalk and I completely covered the surface. You can see as I'm rubbing on the chalk, the surface is not completely flat, so I don't know if it was my brush or the chalkboard paint, but I'm curious to see how this project ends up. When I was done, I used my eraser to remove the excess chalk dust. I'm adding a rope accent onto the handles, and I'm using some of the nautical rope from the Dollar Tree. I used a dot of hot glue to attach the rope, then began to wrap it around the handle, securing it in place with my hot glue gun. After I added rope to my first handle, I then moved on to my second, and I followed the exact same instructions. I'm adding 2 coastal accents to the front of my tray, and I'm using this wooden ship's wheel from the Dollar Tree, along with this wooden anchor that I picked up at Walmart. I want them to match the color of the rope, so I'm using some of this pretty parchment acrylic paint. Once they've dried, and to give each one a little accent, I like to use my pencil and shade around the edges. I use my finger to rub in the pencil mark, and this leaves them with a soft gray edging. To attach them to my tray, I'm wiping away a small area of chalk and making sure they'll fit. I'm using my E6000 and attaching them both into place. And when I'm done, my coastal chalkboard makeover is complete. To start my third project, I'm using a tin barn star that I picked up at a yard sale, and you can see this needs a lot of help. So I'm starting by using my clippers, and I'm removing all of those messy pip berries. And underneath I found this pretty star with a whole bunch of holes. My idea is to turn this into a hanging planter, so I'm also using one of the flower pots from the Dollar Tree. I'm using some white acrylic paint, and I'm giving each of them a coat. I'm using white for my project, but I think any color would look really pretty. With both pieces dry, I'm going to distress my star using a piece of sandpaper. I'm briskly rubbing it along the edge of the star's supports, and I'm just removing a little bit of paint. To get to the inside creases of the star, I'm using a wooden skewer. And just like the sandpaper, I'm rubbing it back and forth to remove a little bit of paint. When I was done, I then went back to my sandpaper and just randomly distressed the star in different places. Before I attach my flower pot, I'm using some Aleene's glue and I'm attaching a piece of Dollar Tree ribbon around the top. I cut my ribbon to size and then using my paintbrush, I added some Aleene's glue around the top and then I just attached my ribbon. Attaching the flower pot to my star, I'm using some floral wire, so I'm cutting 2 pieces long enough to wrap around the pot and to feed in through the star, and then I'm twisting them together to make them basically one piece. Making sure that I'm at the halfway mark of my wire, I'm then wrapping it around the pot and I'm twisting it into place. I'm then using my E6000 to secure the wire to the pot. When my E6000 had set up and it was dry, I then used some white acrylic paint to hide the wire. I'm going to add a bead accent around the pot, so I'm using some of these Dollar Tree beads. I'm stringing them on to another piece of floral wire and I'm just making sure that it's long enough to wrap around the pot. When I'm done, I'm using my same white acrylic paint and I'm giving them a coat. One thing that I found out about these beads is they like to bleed through, so I literally gave them 4 coats of paint, and I think next time if I work with them, I'm going to end up using spray paint. When all 4 of my coats of paint finally dried, I'm then attaching my beads to the pot by using my glue gun. I cut away the excess bead wire. Then using my 2 original pieces of wire, I slipped one through each hole. I pulled the pot tightly against the star and then I twisted my wires in the back. I found these little stars attached to the pip berries and I just painted some black and some gray. I then used my E6000 along with a little bit of hot glue and I attached them onto the front of the flower pot. I added in some Dollar Tree succulents, eucalyptus, and some pussy willows, and with that, my updated barn star is complete. Thanks so much for stopping by and hanging out with me. If you're new and you haven't yet subscribed and you're thinking, hey, I'd like to come back and hang out with her again, don't forget to click that little red subscribe button below. Be sure to check out our amazing playlist and I will see you soon. Bye everybody!